And so Childe, one of the best husbando in the game right now, is finally back. Insanely cool, he's a character that really loves his brothers and sister, amazingly fun to play with, one of the most unique playstyle in the game up until now. So it has been a while since he's been back, and so in today's video I want to dedicate into having a deep dive into Childe once again in terms of his playstyle as well as his current ranking in the meta, to see what kind of change he has already had ever since he was released. So for any of you who have just decided to pull for Childe, or those of you who have been using him for a very long time, can have kind of like a refresh idea of how he is currently faring. And so with that, let us just dive into the video. Now let's get this straight. Childe is an amazing character. He can do things that not many other characters in the game can do. Childe, guys, for those of you who don't know, has always been a highly technical character who focuses on being the hydro enabler for your team, and he is not a solo and hyper carry DPS for the team. Even though most of the time on Childe's team you will be seeing taking the field, but he is there to mainly apply hydro for your team. Overall, Childe is such a good hydro enabler character that whenever you're having him on the team, your enemy is basically always going to be having hydro being applied onto them. So due to his highly technical nature of Childe's playstyle, his personal damage wouldn't usually be really high, since the highest number you're seeing on his team will be his sub DPS partners doing reaction damage. Therefore, there have been many misunderstandings in the community thinking that Childe is a weak character, but it's actually not, and it's just that Childe is basically the hardest character to master in Genshin Impact right now, and once you do, you'll be able to see his team ceiling damage being very high. So that's basically Childe before the current patch 4.0, guys. Now what about his current position now that we have already arrived in Fontaine and in patch 4.0? And I would say that he's still currently the best hydro applicator and enabler from what I can see. Many hydro characters have come, yet none came close to the amount of hydro Childe can supply. Therefore, what he's currently best at, he will still be the one for quite some more time. Even when Furina comes, I feel that she won't be a character that competes with Childe, since her role may be entirely different. However, the biggest question remains is that due to the number of hydro characters being released, can Childe value still be there? Now, I still feel Childe is a very strong hydro character since he's enabling your other team member, plus he can also deal decent damage from his part too. Unlike character like Kokomi, who's just there for hydro application and supporting your team, which can lose out on damage at time, Childe's team can have characters such as Bennett, therefore leaving space for higher damage ceiling. From what I can see, he still has a somewhat different role compared to the majority of hydro characters out there, so he'll still have good teams in the meta. But here's the thing, a downside of Childe may be that he doesn't scales with HP, and if Furina, for example, becomes a character that buffs HP for hydro character, the other hydro HP scaling character like Yelan, Neuvillette and others will potentially have much higher team scaling ceiling than Childe currently does, which is probably the biggest thing right now. Yet guys, regardless, we can't deny the fact that Childe is very fun and unique in his mechanic, making his team gameplay largely different than your usual ones. So once again, I just have to say that Genshin Impact is technically quite an easy game enough. Therefore, playing the character that you love and enjoy, especially like Childe who has amazing kit, would be really fun to have, regardless of how many hydro character you will be pulling for in the future. Next, we'll be moving on to Childe's skill and kit. Now I won't be going too in depth into this, but I will be covering the most important point you want to note, which should usually be more than enough for you to play Childe efficiently. Now Childe's a very unique character is because he kind of like a character that uses two weapons at the same time. His normal attack will be him doing his bow normal attack, however when you cast his E skill, he will turn into like a hydro double sword user. But what's more importantly within his kit, and the reason why he becomes the best hydro enabler in the game, is due to what's called Riptide. So what Riptide does is that opponent affected by Riptide will suffer from AoE hydro damage effect when attacked by Childe in various ways. So basically it's kind of like a various ways that you can apply hydro and dealing AoE hydro damage, but what is better is that whenever you're in his E skill stance, it will do what's called Riptide Slash. Is that whenever it hits an opponent affected by Riptide during Childe's E, it will deal AoE hydro damage that's considered as E skill damage to the opponent. However, Childe's Ascension 4 passive just took this to the next level and enhanced his quality of life by a ton. Is that whenever he deals a crit hit in his melee stance or his E skill, he will apply the Riptide started effect onto his opponent. So having this passive, it just made Childe Kit basically complete in every way, because without this it's technically very hard for Childe to actually apply Riptide onto his enemies, because the only way he would have been able to do it is using his bow aim shot, which is basically not practical in most situations. But with this, applying Riptide and therefore hydro application from Childe's kit is absolutely very easy. Now something to note about his E skill is that the longer you stay in his E skill form, the longer the cooldown will generally be. Therefore, whenever you're playing Childe, it is important that you kind of time your E skill usage on him, especially when you are at a Childe C0, so that you can manage Childe's team rotation efficiently. Now regarding to this, there are a lot of little variables involved determining how long you should stay in melee, but guys, just for a quick short answer, generally you only want to stay in his melee form for around 9 seconds, because then you will only be having a 15-second cooldown. Longer than that and you will start to have a much higher cooldown duration, making it quite hard for your team to have proper rotations. Now Childe's burst is also pretty interesting. It has two different ways of using it and each have its own aims and purpose. That whenever you're in your bow form, which is his normal form, if you cast his burst, it will deal AoE hydro damage while also applying Riptide status to your enemies. However, while you're in his E skill stance, he will perform a large AoE slash that deals massive hydro damage to all surrounding opponents while also triggering Riptide Blast. What Riptide Blast does is that if your opponent currently is affected by Riptide, it will clear that Riptide status and also triggers a hydro explosion that also deals AoE hydro damage. So after knowing this, when should you use range and when should you use melee? Is that range burst is usually used when you're initiating combat, because it is a good starter, especially when you're in the abyss floor. It applies Riptide status into your surrounding enemies. The good thing also is that it refunds Childe 20 energy, so later on it will be easier for you to use his melee burst during his rotation. For melee burst, generally it is best use when you're having your enemies being applied by Riptide, because what it does is that of course it triggers Riptide Blast, therefore you're having an additional extra hit onto your enemies. Melee burst is kind of like nuke Childe gameplay. It would deal very high one burst instances of damage, which is why Childe has always been very good in speed running as well, because he is also one of the best character for nuke gameplay. Childe's first passive will be extending your Riptide duration by 8 seconds, a pretty decent passive, also extending Childe's ability for hydro application. Childe also has one of the most unique utility passive in the game right now, is that increase your own party members' normal attack level talent by 1, though this is not really that significant because most of his team member doesn't usually use normal attack, as they are either relying on their E skill or their burst damage. Now talking about talent priority, guys, Childe basically has two main ways of playing, which is either you're playing his melee focus, which is generally the way that most of us play Childe, or it's going to be burst focus or basically nuke damage, where you're focusing on everything regarding his burst damage and try to clear the enemies as fast as you can. So if you're focusing on his melee, it's gonna be first increasing his E skill and then his burst, then his normal attack. If you're focusing on his burst, then of course you want to increase his burst damage first and then his E skill and then his normal attack. Note that increasing his normal attack talent level also increases his Riptide damage, so it's also recommended that you focus on leveling up normal attack whenever you have the chance. Moving on to Childe's best artifact, we first off have of course the 4 Nymphs Dream set. Is technically a set that's made for Childe, of course for other hydro characters as well, but Childe is utilizing this set absolutely perfectly. However guys, here's the thing, is that if you've already have a very good Heart of Depth set and you've been farming that for a very long time, you can still use it because the set is still very good on Childe. And especially remember guys, good substat is usually better than you having 4 piece bonuses, as good crit ratio decides the best. So Heart of Depth is usually for kind of like veterans player at this point. If you are newer players into Genshin Impact, you can just go ahead and farm the 4 Nymph's Dream, as that of course is the best set for Childe. You can of course mix and match between 2 piece Hydro with 2 attack, 2 EM or 2 piece Noblesse depending on your artifact situations as well. Now if you're playing Childe as melee DPS, then his artifact stat would be attack percentage, Hydro damage bonus and crit ratio. If you're playing Nuke, then the main stat would generally be still the same. However, the artifacts you want to be using is generally more toward Noblesse Oblige along with 2 piece Hydro damage bonus, because then you're more focusing on doing your burst damage. So Noblesse Oblige 2 piece will generally yield you better result. For Childe's weapon, we have so many good bow coming and going along after so many patches. However, if we're looking into the 5-star option, Polar Star is still Childe's BIS option. Afterward, it's gonna be Thundering Pulse. And then if you're able to pull the Skyward Harp from the standard banner, it's still one of the better options you can use. Obviously better than most of the other 4-star you have. So Skyward Harp is still very good. Other weapons such as Hunter's Path, Aqua Simulacra, the newest Magician's Bow can still be used on Childe if you do happen to have that on your account. For 4-star option guys, Viridescent Hunt generally still the best 4-star option for him. After that, if you have the Sign of the Blazing Sun, which is the newest bow from the Battle Pass, you can use that too. However, I generally still prefer the Viridescent Hunt as it is technically easier to use. But other than that, if you don't, then the Rust R5, if you do have it on your account, is still a very good weapon for Childe until now. The Rust is still technically a gacha weapon, therefore weapons like the Prototype Crescent that you can craft, get that to an R5 and it will still yield you very decent result. Moving on, let's have a look at Childe's Constellation, considering that Childe has been out for a long time, so some of us may be considering his cons. However guys, I just have straight up to say is that Childe's cons are some of the least impactful constellation in Genshin Impact, meaning that his constellation don't generally gives you a direct increase in damage numbers. Overall, the best investment I would say if you want to go for his constellation would be his C1. Is that because it decreases his cooldowns of his E skill by 20%, therefore giving you a lot more breathing room in terms of his E skill window, easier rotation and therefore more E skill uptime, getting you a bit more damage on his side. C2, when opponent affected by Riptide are defeated, Childe regenerate 4 elemental energy, doesn't really helps him too much apart from lowering his energy requirement. His C4, applying a mark will cause Riptide to trigger every 4 seconds. Riptide Slash and Riptide Flash triggering by this constellation effect are not subjected to the time interval. C4 doesn't really offer too much every damage for most rotation, and from all of the calculation, at most a barely noticeable amount of 8% damage increase can be seen from Childe C4. For a C6, it allows you to use his melee burst as an opener and allows more room for arrows during melee stance. It basically also allows you for pure melee gameplay, however usually it's not recommended due to a lack of team that can support this. So overall, this constellation is mainly for quality of life and doesn't have an entirely direct increase into Childe's damage. So as I've mentioned, if you want to invest into Childe, then obviously it's best to get his weapon, as that is going to be the biggest increase into his damage. But if you still want to go for constellation and you don't have too much Primo Gems to spend on, then yes, just go for a C1 Childe, then you're more than good to go. With all that being said, we move on to the most interesting parts of the video, which is basically Childe's team comp. Now guys, Childe does have many variations of his team that can be built, especially when he is the best Hydro enabler in the game. Therefore, technically he will be able to fit into any Hydro reaction teams, but there's still one best team that Childe's fit in, and it's basically the International Childe's team that features Childe, Bennett, Xiangling, an Anemo flex that is either going to be Kazuha or Sucrose. This team is generally still one of the best team in the game right now. Basically, will be there to help you clear any content that you are having trouble with. But not only that, it also stands for some of the fastest abyss clear times in the game too. So yes, if you have Childe, then generally just go with his team. It is just too good. That will make your life easier as well. Taser team can still be used along with Childe. Before Dendro reaction arrived, Taser was one of the best Childe team too, featuring Childe, Bennett, Beidou, as well as Fischl or Raiden if you have her. Childe also works on a Permafrost team that features Childe, Diona, Rosaria, and Kazuha. This team will probably have the lowest damage output because yes, Permafreeze team doesn't have any reactions apart from freezing your enemies. However, if you're having trouble with your enemies moving around like a lot, especially when in the abyss, then yes, Permafreeze team is still very good in the meta. However, ever since Dendro arrived, guys, Childe's team also have many good Dendro variation towards it. Generally, the biggest two will definitely be Burgeon and Hyper Bloom. For Burgeon, you can use Childe along with Thoma, Yao Yao, and Nahida. Double Dendro here is usually fine, considering Childe is a character that is very good with Hydro application already, and of course Thoma is a character that is generally the best at triggering Burgeon, so he is gonna be there. Now if you want to use Hyper Bloom, because if you've already got like very good character build, especially Kuki Shinobu, Kuki will be replacing Thoma's place. And yes, since Kuki Shinobu is also a healer, you can swap out Yao Yao for Dendro MC for example, and that would be really good. Now if you want to try Bloom team, then he can still work too. Do keep in mind is that Bloom team will require you to have Nilou, because of course Nilou Bountiful Core team is still the best Bloom team in the game. So you can have Childe, Nilou, Nahida, and Yao Yao. If you have Baizu, then that is also good because Baizu will help you to have an easier time healing yourself. So still, this is an okay team. However guys, Childe's international team is still generally going to be the best. So most of the other team that he is featured in, it will be just you having some fun team variation. But nonetheless, of course, we want to have as many team that we can play a character in, because the more team we have, the more fun we can have with the character. Childe's a very fun character, guys. I really love using him. The biggest thing whenever you're using Childe is that he does have quite a steep learning curve at the start, because of his E skill management. If you are not used to it, it's gonna be there. But once you're used to using Childe, he's very fun and unique to play around with, breathing in some fresh air into your Genshin Impact team build and gameplay. So that should be everything I have to say regarding Childe's build and Childe as a character in the current meta, guys. I hope that the video have been very helpful to you. If you do have any questions, just leave it down in the comment section, and I or some other lovely Genshin player out there will get to you. Now, if you are someone who's still wondering whether or not to get Zhongli, then I have a very in-depth video going through that, guys, so be sure to check out the video here, as I'm sure it will be very valuable to you. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me till this part of the video, and with that, I wish you a super day, and I will catch you on my next video.